As the National Ski Patrol celebrates its 70th anniversary, it has 10 divisions with more than 26,000 members, serving at over 400 ski areas. While much has changed, the mission and foundations of this organization remain as solid bedrock for the future. But where did it all come from? The idea of evacuating injured people using a toboggan has many examples throughout history, but in modern times is most traceable to the evacuation of wounded troops in mountainous areas. During World War I, the basis for modern alpine skiing emerged from extensive fighting on skis in the Alps. After World War I, alpine skiing continued to evolve in mountain villages like St. Anton in Austria, Chamonix, France, and at Mürren in Switzerland. Soon, downhill skiing was the most dominant winter sport in the Alps. The sport was brought to North America by European instructors and those Americans who could afford to winter in Europe. Roland Palmedo, a New York investment banker, was one who spent many winters skiing in the Alps. While in Davos, Switzerland, he was impressed when he witnessed the Parsendienst, a Swiss Army ski unit, bring a stricken skier off the Parsen Glacier. Together with friends in 1931, Palmedo formed one of America's first alpine ski clubs, the Amateur Ski Club of New York. By the mid-1930s, there were dozens of alpine ski clubs. Ski trains provided easy access to mountains for thousands, and rope tows dragged them up the slopes. As more and more people tried skiing, it became apparent that first aid and care was needed for the injured. In 1934, at the urging of Roland Palmedo, the Mount Mansfield Ski Club formed a safety committee. Within a year, they had a patrol of club volunteers who had completed the Red Cross first aid course. It was all modeled upon the Parsen daily patrol that Palmedo had seen in Switzerland.
Who really were the first patrollers? Who had the first ski patrol? And the claims range as far west as Mount Hood, and in the east, the Otter Patrol, who serve at Pico. You've got folks around the Gore mountain area.
The Schenectady Winter Sports Club operated snow trains to North Creek, New York. Their first aid committee made up 10 first aid kits and assigned them to competent skiers who were required to take first aid training from the Schenectady chapter of the National Red Cross. On Oregon's Mount Hood, Hank Lewis declared that he was the patrol, recalling, "I supplied my own equipment, borrowed an old roll-nosed toboggan from the Y-East cabin, and took a first aid course in Portland." The Mount Hood Ski Patrol was formally organized in the spring of 1938.
I don't think anybody wants that claim of who might have been first ever to be definitively defined, because we have such great history, and that kind of debate is kind of a friendly debate. I've never heard it elevated to anything but kind of a friendly discussion of who might have been first. But Charles Minot Dole, Minnie Dole, our founder, is essentially the father of our organization.
My name is Charles Minot Dole, Jr., known as Mint. I am the son of Charles Minot Dole, better known as Minnie in the ski world and in the 10th Mountain Division. As my father observed in his book, Adventures in Skiing, I do not think there were patrols, as we came to know them later, but groups of interested local citizens willing to spot locate toboggans and be around weekends to assist any injured skiers to safety. My dad was a member of Roland's Amateur Ski Club and broke his ankle skiing with his fellow club member, Frank Edson, up at Stowe over New Year's in 1936. As he later wrote, "When you injured something in those days, you were strictly on your own." Ironically, Stowe had a rudimentary ski patrol organized by Roland Palmedo, but was not set up to spot accidents. It merely had a few willing souls who were around.
Stranded up on Mount Mansfield's toll road with a cold drizzle settling in, Dole was relieved when finally his wife and skiing companions, the Edsons, returned with a piece of tin roofing and an extra set of hands to haul him off the mountain. Minnie was still on crutches when he heard that his friend Frank Edson was killed, racing for their ski club on an icy ghost trail near Pittsfield, Massachusetts. Shocked by the fatal accident, the club's board of governors convened the next day, and Roland Palmedo asked Minnie Dole, as Frank Edson's best friend, to head a safety committee to study the causes and preventions of ski accidents.
In 1936, Dole, based on his own injury, the death of his close friend, Frank Edson, starts to talk to the clubs and sends out surveys that says, who's getting injured, how are they getting injured, what's causing the injuries, and starts collecting data to say, what really is going on to understand the complete picture. And based on those studies, he finds that there is a need for on-hill rescue services. Not everybody raised their hand and said, hey, wow, what a great deal, go for it. When Minnie Dole said to folks, look, what do you think about an organization that would provide service and safety to folks on the hill? There were actually folks who said they thought it was a bad idea. They thought that if you're a mountaineer, an alpinist, a skier, you're in the mountains, part of your responsibility is to, if you get hurt, to figure out how to get yourself out, and that's your responsibility, it's not someone else's. And you're taking that element of risk away and making it safer and more protected, and so you're taking away a big part of what skiing was all about.
To overcome this reluctance, Dole sought out the support of America's best skiers, men like Bob Livermore and Dick Durrance, the country's foremost racer. By the winter of 1937 and 38, when the state of New Hampshire had completed the first aerial tramway in North America at Cannon Mountain, they organized a paid ski patrol to help ensure public safety at their facility. In Idaho at Sun Valley, Union Pacific engineers invented and installed chairlifts. That destination resort relied on their European ski instructors to act like alpine mountain guides and supply any necessary first aid or rescue on their slopes.
I joined the patrol in 1938. And that was the year they started the National Ski Patrol.
The genesis of at least the National Ski Patrol was that 1938 national race on the nosedive at Stowe.
The old nosedive, there'll never be a trail like that.
George Wesson should know. He headed the Stowe Patrol throughout the 1950s. But the 1938 Nationals were before any chairlifts at Stowe. And the Mount Mansfield Ski Club was worried about serious accidents. With both a downhill and a slalom on the nosedive with its notorious 7 turns, they turned to Minnie Dole to organize a special race patrol.
He puts together a team of folks properly equipped with sleds and first aid equipment and provided really the first point of an organized rescue system that then was the launching point into the National Ski Patrol. People saw the organization, the equipment, the training that these folks had.
Roger Langley, the president of the United States Ski Association, was impressed.
Recalling the words of Roger Langley, Dad wrote in his book, "You know," he said, "this patrol you've put together is terrific. I've been standing here thinking of what a wonderful thing it would be for skiing if you could organize such patrols on a national basis. If I appointed you chairman of the National Ski Patrol Committee, would you take it?" In achieving Langley's objectives, Dad envisioned a 3-pronged approach. First, gather information and make it available. Secondly, to coordinate all ski patrols uniformly to be advised by a central governing body. And lastly, build up an esprit de corps within the patrols to make them a real constabulary and make the job one of honor and service.
Gretchen Besser, herself a lifelong patroller, is the official National Ski Patrol historian.
The prevention of accidents was that was one of the reasons people would go into the National Ski Patrol. Patrolling on snowboards, Nordic patrolling, everything to keep people from getting hurt.
The National Ski Patrol has a motto, safety and service. It essentially, in 2 words, describes the root goals of our organization. One is to focus on issues of safety on the mountain for all users of the mountain, skiers, snowboarders, telemarkers, all sliding device users. And it's not only care after injury, but the focus of prevention of injury.
For over 35 years, Dr. Robert Johnson has run a case study on ski injuries at Sugarbush in Vermont, while providing triage and his expertise to the ski patrol.
The main thing that's come out of this study has been the development of standards of how equipment should be designed and function, and tested and mounted, and all the things that you do with equipment to keep it running properly, just like any other machine that you use. You service your car, you better service your bindings as well. What our case control study really can do is give us a true incidence of the injury rate that occurs on the mountain. By the number of injured people that come through the project and divided into the number of people that are uninjured. And that's the way we monitor whether things are getting better or worse as time goes on. I've heard some prominent people say, well, the doctors aren't interested in reducing the risk of injury, it's going to cut down their business. You know, it's kind of irritating to me because I spent 35 years trying to figure out ways to let me ski more and spend less time in here. And if we can find something by changing the standard on the equipment or recognize that certain way you do things is going to minimize the risk of getting to the position where you get injured, that's what our goal has been. I mean, you know, it's prevention, sure.
That's the safety piece. The service is that, unlike many other rescue organizations in the world, especially those involved with mountain rescue, the National Ski Patrol does not charge for its services. From the very beginning, that foundation block, that concept of, look, we aren't going to charge for these fees, set the course to say that we were going to be an organization of primarily volunteers. And the folks who laid the building blocks of our organization with DOLE fostered that concept, and it's been a concept that's persisted to this day.
You treat the patient in a way that doesn't cause more harm. That's the first rule, doctor do no harm. And the patrol's goal is the same as ours. Minimize the risk of greater injury to the part that's injured.
1, 2, 3.
The neck injury or back injury is a good example because if he flew off the trail, sometimes it takes some pretty ingenious work to get people out of places and not hurt them. But the whole goal is to, from the standpoint of the patrol and from our standpoint, is to support the patient and get him in to where he can be either triaged to the hospital, if there is no doctor at the bottom of the mountain, sent to the appropriate doctor. And the patrol probably has a rougher time if we're not here.
So if you're at a ski area that's a National Ski Patrol area and you're injured, you will not be charged for the services for taking you from the mountain and getting you to the bottom so that you can get to definitive care. And that makes us very different than some of the organizations that provide, say, mountain rescue in Europe, for example. Our primary service is to the skiing public, but what gets folks out of bed in the morning at 6 to drive to the mountain so that the trails can be checked and skiers can be on the mountain by 8 is because they're part of a team, a part of that family. You want to serve the public, but you also don't want to let down the rest of your family or patrollers. It's a team effort.
You heard of the guy who broke his femur? Yep. Oh, yeah.
In 3 seasons, the National Ski Patrol grew to include 180 registered patrols with over 4,000 volunteer patrolmen. Hundreds of small ski areas depended on these volunteers. But as large ski resorts emerged in America, the need for paid patrols on their staff became apparent. From its opening in 1938, New Hampshire's paid Cannon Mountain Patrol proved its value, and by 1941, Mount Hood in Oregon, Stowe, Vermont, Sugar Bowl in California, Alta, Utah, and Sun Valley had their own patrol directors with paid full-timers on patrol, augmented with volunteers from the National Ski Patrol. In 1940, when Sun Valley opened their big mountain operations on Mount Baldy with 3 chairlifts, they needed a full-time patrol. As their new ski school director, Austrian national champion Friedel Pfeiffer was more of a mountain manager responsible for all functions related to skiing at the destination resort.
Friedel came in, and he was really responsible for the development of the ski patrol. Friedel appointed me as head of the ski patrol. The term might sound terrific, however, the ski patrol at Sun Valley was almost the same as a highway maintenance crew. First aid when necessary. Packing snow by sidestepping and shoveling. And that was actually the beginning of my ski career. Shovel my way in.
But war was raging in Europe.
Minnie Dole was a great student of history, and he watched the success the Finns were having fighting the Russians on the ground using ski troops, and how small, highly trained mountain troops could really wreak havoc on conventional troops in mountain warfare.
The heroic Army of Defense speeds up. It knows the Arctic country, knows its snows, knows the uselessness of modern mechanized equipment on a wintry Finnish terrain, clothes its men in white, and puts them on skis and sleighs, the better to hide from enemy eyes, the better to maneuver into striking position.
It was right here in this Adirondack camp Dad read how the Finns decimated the Russians using skis and guerrilla tactics. Dad became convinced that the mountain troops were important to the U.S. war effort and decided to take his plan to Washington, a Herculean task.
Of course, Minnie was right. The Europeans had mountain troops, and the enemy had mountain troops. We're going to have to contest them somewhere.
And so he lobbied the military, who initially were not too open to his suggestion, but Dole was incredibly persistent.
Finally, connections landed him a meeting with the top man, General Marshall, the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army. Dad must have made quite an impression, because the meeting led to the formation of the 10th Mountain Division. Not only that, but the NSPS would play a major role.
The National Ski Patrol was tasked with recruiting members to fill out the 10th Mountain Division. And because of that, if you read a roster of the 10th Mountain Division, it's a who's who list of alpinists, mountaineers, skiers, racers, instructors who joined the 10th Mountain to be a part of those very elite mountain troops.
These are the United States Mountain Troops.
Oh, give me skis and some cool with twisted. Let me ski way around now.
I was leafing through the Christian Science Monitor and found a little story about the formation of the 87th Mountain Infantry Regiment. And I thought, well, that's for me. And the story outlined the fact that I would need 3 letters of recommendation and so on and so on. So I called the ski patrol in Boston, and they sent me the application. So I got the letters together and sent them in.
I knew that the 10th Mountain were recruiting, but I never had 3 letters of recommendations. I was a member of National Ski Patrol, did ski, I had first aid. The next thing I knew, I had a letter that I was accepted within the 10th Mountain when my number came up.
As head ski patrolman at Sun Valley, it wasn't difficult to end up in the mountain troops that were being formed.
I knew Minnie Dole personally, and there were a lot of guys like that automatically went in, because all of us had been known competitively years before that, so we didn't have to go through the paperwork.
That first batch, where everybody was an outdoor person.
Rock climbers, skiers, had been used to the mountains as part of our youth.
I was assigned to A Company, and I walked in. The minute I walked into the building, there were two other fellows there that had just arrived the day before, and 2 weeks before that, I had skied with them at Cannon Mountain.
I arrived in the barracks, and there was one bed that was already made up with shoes shined underneath and so forth. And I said, whose bed is this? And the soldier said, that's your squad leader, Leon Goodman, who was a great racer and so forth from Sun Valley. We could see right away that we were among, these famous skiers. At that point, they formed the mountain training group, and all of our better skiers went to the mountain training group. Gordon Wren, Friedel Pfeiffer, Tony Matt, and so on. And their job was to train the next level of instructors, and I was one of those. And this is a good point where the early pioneers, like Minnie Dole, should be congratulated, because by and large, there were a lot of very fine American skiers like Leon Goodman and Litchfield. We learned a lot from guys like that. So we did rock climbing, skiing, living in the snow, making snow caves. And of course they did the famous artillery versus avalanche test.
And we were blasting avalanche areas before we went up there, both with the 60 millimeter mortars and with 81 millimeter mortars. We used both, depending on how close we could get.
For the soldiers of the 10th, mountain rescue was more a part of life at Camp Hale than a danger from avalanches. And along with these skills came an appreciation for the honed application of teamwork, tempered by self-reliance.
As a unit, we all had to be trained for teamwork and operation in the mountains. And supply of mountain troops can be a problem because of the terrain. So that means that each person, each soldier has to carry pretty much their own supplies. And the equipment, there was no cold weather equipment in the quartermaster corps. It had to be developed.
Like the 10th Mountain, a ski patrol runs on teamwork, but at the same time requires self-reliance, demanding that you carry much of what is needed in an emergency. The end of World War II offered both a corps of men trained to operate in the mountains and a surplus of ski equipment.
Out of Dad's office on Lexington Avenue, New York, he screened some 26,000 men. At one point, I was told, the 87th Regiment had the highest IQ of any Army unit and had the highest death toll of any division.
The tale of the 10th doesn't end with World War II, because those folks were the heart and soul of the mountain world. So they came back, and their love for the sport, their love of the outside, set the tone and lit the fire of ski area development in the late 40s and into the 50s.
Many of the men coming out of the 10th wanted to live in the mountains and sought a way of making a living from skiing or the outdoors. The effect of this was to establish a reservoir of expertise in skiing that served over the next half-century as a network that would, ski area by ski area, cause the American ski industry to bloom. George Wesson was one of these men. He recalls how a lifelong career in ski patrolling began.
I was supposed to go to Mad River, but they didn't open Mad River, and they asked us to go up to Mount Mansfield and patrol there in the 47-48 season. And then the following year, they asked us to come back to Mad River because now they had the single chair in. And I said, no, I'm staying right here. And the third year I was there, I was patrol director. While at Mount Mansfield, we had Army sled toboggans, which were used within the 10th Mountain, and we just dragged it along in back of us. We were going full speed out, hell-bent for election.
I'd be the first to agree that it's a knack for handling them. It's not an easy situation to do. And of course, I'm referring to the old big red toboggans with just a hook on the front.
Howard Martin signed on at Mad River in 1949 and served on the 1960 Olympic Patrol at Squaw Valley. At 81, he keeps current and is still an active volunteer patrolman.
I got my national in 52. We only had 3 trails in 3 quick trips. I could pretty much know the condition of the trails. I'd know if I had an accident, where I was going to run the toboggan and how I was going to run it. Ski racer usually looks his course over, knows what he's going to do. And that's no different than what I'm talking about. I just knew what I was going to do before it happened.
The best toboggan I've found in all my years of ski patrolling was the Sun Valley. Nelson Bennett's design. Well, I knew Nelson from the 10th.
The ski patrol at Sun Valley, when I went there The rescue device or evacuation device was a regular Northland pleasure toboggan. The control of that device was difficult and slow. Over a course of time and trial and error, it was possible to develop a handier device that was easier to use and very, very easy to control.
I took a run with that down to National. This was for the internationals. The accident happened up in the steep part where the men's slalom was. And all the gatekeepers in that general area and all the officials had crampons on. And I went down through them just like this. No slipping, sliding, or anything. Because of that lifting the front end, I was just going down on that point then. When I made a turn, that was digging right in.
Several 10th Mountain veterans found work with the Forest and Park Service. Brian Linder was the Stowe Ski Patrol Director until he became the Forest Service Ranger for the Mount Mansfield and Smuggler's Notch Forest.
And he's the one that had charge of that whole area as far as the state was concerned. And he lived in the base lodge.
We work very closely with the Park Service, both here and in the West, as one of our industry partners, and have been this way for many, many, many years.
The Forest Service, post-war, was starting to issue permits for the development of ski areas on national forest lands. And when they did that, they inherited the responsibility for public safety on these lands. The basic driving force was to ensure public safety.
And so the patrol works hand in hand with the Park Service. Oftentimes the Park Service will want to run courses, let's say avalanche awareness courses. National Ski Patrol assists in that. So the Park Service, along with the ski area management, are all industry partners.
Some veterans from the 10th were uniquely qualified to develop more sophisticated methods for avalanche control.
There was Monty Atwater, who started avalanche research in this country at Alta.
It sort of started at Alta. It was a hotbed of avalanche activity, probably the most concentrated place in the country, where you got lots of avalanches on the roads and on the ski area at the same time.
One of the great avalanche and snow experts to come out of the 10th, Monty Atwater, went on to become the nation's most important avalanche expert.
When I joined him, I brought a little more of the scientific background, both from my training in physics and the fact that I had spent a year in Switzerland working with the Swiss Avalanche Institute.
We spent 1 year in Davos, Switzerland, at the Swiss Federal Avalanche Institute, and he learned modern methods and brought them to Utah when we came there. Monty Atwater started the research, but Ed refined it and turned it into a science.
Yeah, Monty had a regular pattern or technique of observations whenever a storm was coming in. It looked like a prospect of avalanches developing. Atwater would say, well, it's time we got another reading on the snow stake. And he or I or whoever from the ski patrol was available would go out to do this. 1953 was my first encounter with big avalanches in Little Cottonwood Canyon. It certainly is still vivid in my mind. The most spectacular incident was an avalanche that almost hit the cabin we were living in at that time.
And the avalanche had come down both sides of the guard station. And things fell off the shelf, and Ed knew right away what it was. He jumped out of bed and said, avalanche.
That made a lot of noise. It was pretty impressive, all right. My first experience was being right next to a lot of big avalanches. My learning curve went up in a hurry at that point. The business of ski areas on national forest lands was something that sort of just evolved, and it was beginning to get big enough that they needed a snow ranger to make sure the public safety was managed if there were avalanches, and just generally with ski conditions. And it was a sort of a learning process for everybody.
Over time, a variety of avalanche weaponry was invented and tested.
This went hand in hand with the evolving training program, the Forest Service avalanche schools that had been developed initially by Atwater and then by the two of us jointly in the 1950s. The control techniques used today were ones that we developed in many cases at Alta back in the 1950s and 60s. The use of explosives, whether placed by hand or with artillery. I recall back in the mid-50s we had quite a research program on how much explosive does it take to release an avalanche.
As head of the ski patrol at Sun Valley, I attended every Forest Service avalanche school at Alta, Utah.
We sort of defined what's the acceptable size of explosive charge to use for avalanche control, and that's still more or less the standard we see today. We were able to really make a lot of the information we had learned available to people who needed it, and to support the evolving professional cadre of ski patrolmen who were doing this kind of work.
And clearly now, if you go west, you'll see crews either flying out in helicopter or by lift, doing their bomb runs, and the patrollers are out there doing avalanche control as needed to make sure that the slopes are safe for the public. You can find the names of national patrollers throughout the creation of education for those people who are going to go in avalanche territory. The National Ski Patrol provides 2 levels of training. One is a kind of an avalanche awareness program, and then a more advanced avalanche course for people who are doing guide work.
When I wrote the history of the National Ski Patrol, Samaritans of the Snow, which came out in 1983, I interviewed hundreds and hundreds of patrollers around the country. And the #1 response to why people patrol was the camaraderie. There was such a feeling of being in one family and being so close to the people that you on your patrol.
I grew up in the ski patrol world. Both of my parents were ski patrollers. My dad was a patrol director and also section chief, a region director. The folks who joined the ski patrol are very much oriented to giving back to the outdoor community that's provided them with so much good experience and providing care. You know, that's kind of the root goal of members. But almost always the second reason that people cite for being a member and staying a member is the camaraderie, that teamwork, that bonding. We are totally neutral on the subject of race, gender, religion. What we care about is, can you do the job?
That's why the ski patrol was the great equalizer between the sexes, because a woman had to be able to bring a toboggan down every bit as well as a man.
My mom was a patroller, a first aid instructor. My wife is a patroller, was a senior ski and toboggan trainer evaluator. My eldest daughter is a patroller, and my youngest daughter will be a patroller this year. If you look at the size of the National Ski Patrol, 90%, I think it is now, are volunteers out of those 26,000 members. So that makes us one of the biggest mountain rescue organizations in the world and one of the biggest volunteer rescue organizations in the world.
From the beginning, Dole enlisted the support of the American Red Cross, requiring patrollers to take their course on first aid. And then he worked closely with the Red Cross to create the winter manual for the ski patrol.
I started with the Green Book. Then the whole National Ski Patrol went to the White Book and the Winter First Aid Manual.
All the patrollers whose shoulders we stand on got it right so well the first time. That's why the change has been really evolutionary and has not had to have been revolutionary.
I would be lying to you if I was telling you that I was exposed to the same knowledge back when I was originally patrolling that I am today. We had traction, but we didn't use it that much, unless the person was really hurting. Get them into a box splint, get them on the toboggan, and get them down the mountain. We had x-rays downstairs for years. Dr. Pedley from Northfield, we used to say working on bones is no different than working on wood. We used to help them put casts on.
There was a lot of cold weather issues that the Red Cross text really wasn't covering. And what evolved in 1985 was a program called Winter Emergency Care, WEC, which was referred to as the WEC program. It was started essentially from scratch. Winter Emergency Care Manual became the Outdoor Emergency Care Manual, reflecting that not only is the text viable for winter care, but also all sorts of outdoor care. And so now it's known as Outdoor Emergency Care, although interestingly enough, still referred to as WEC.
So while training and the level of medical sophistication on and off the mountain has advanced over the past 70 years, techniques for first aid and hill evacuation still reflect the simplicity of the early patrol.
If you want to be a member of the National Ski Patrol, even though you're a doctor or a nurse, EMTs, wilderness first responders, whatever your card says, when you come to the National Ski Patrol, you have to get through the OEC course, get through the on-hill training at your particular area. You need to clear those to become a member of the National Ski Patrol. DOLE recognized that there were two components of training that were going to be required. One was the actual on-hill skills, i.e. the skiing and toboggan handling to get people off, but also the first aid skills and the emergency care skills to help stabilize those patients before they got to definitive care. What we have is what we carry, so you're limited to what fits in your belt pack or backpack and what you can put on a sled reasonably. But what that means is that patrollers inherently are creative and can do a lot with a little in terms of stabilization, in terms of care.
I think our relationship with the National Ski Patrol is really at the local level. And we don't critique the patrol very much because they know what they're doing, and they're a lot better at extricating people from the mountain than any dumb doctor would ever be.
You want the simplest, easiest, most bulletproof pieces of equipment to pull out of your sled and know that, you know, whether it's been rained on or it's 20 below or the wind's howling at 40, whatever you take out of that sled is going to be a viable piece of equipment as a part of the rescue. There's a 1941 film that shows a ski patroller in action. The folks from 2007 looking into that sled in 1941 would clearly recognize the elements and the basic uses of each of those things in the sled. You know, the blanket, the long splint, a short splint, cravats. So those tools are all the same. If you were to take that patroller from 1941, bring him to today, what we do as patrollers today would be immediately recognizable to that patroller, and in very short order would be a very competent member of a patrol team providing care to a patient today.
But the expertise of the patrol has evolved through years of experience and specialized training, and this work has helped expand knowledge about ski injuries.
It's a constantly evolving process. Doing the work, providing the rescue, getting that person to definitive care, being able to work closely with the docs who provide that feedback is really a great thing for us.
What our case control study really can do is give us a true incidence of the injury rate that occurs on the mountain. And that's the way we monitor whether things are getting better or worse as time goes on. Overall injury rate is about 2.5 per thousand for skiers and maybe 3.4, something like that, for snowboarders. That's varied a bit from time to time through the years. It's not as bad as it used to be. The injury rate has definitely gone down significantly. It was like 7 or 8 per thousand in the early days of when we started. And we've had a special interest in the relationship of equipment function to the production of injuries and all the demographics, that is their age, height, weight, skiing ability, and compare the injured population to the uninjured population.
The most radical of change is the way we communicate.
Communication has been vital to successful patrolling, and it's here perhaps that technology has offered the greatest help.
In the old days, you waited to hear someone come down the mountain to report an injury, who would then pass the word to patrollers who would then try to find that injury, and hopefully, you know, the instructions were good enough.
As ski patrol director, George Wesson had 20 field phones at his disposal spread over Mount Mansfield.
Army Field EE88 telephones.
If you were lucky, you had a phone system that was strung across the mountain. And if someone was injured, they would go to a phone box, crank the phone, report to a main hub operator to say, you know, I'm at phone box 19 and there's an injury uphill of me. Currently, with handheld radios that every patroller can carry, communication across the mountain is much quicker, it's much more efficient, and actually we can do more work with less patrollers because we're able to communicate in that way.
In Europe, international ski races were patrolled by the hosting country's military. In 1960, when the Olympics came to Squaw Valley, California, the National Ski Patrol put together an all-volunteer patrol. The International Olympic Committee was skeptical about American volunteerism, but the patrol's professionalism drew high praise, and the 3 Winter Olympic Games held in North America since have each been served by a volunteer patrol.
No one gets paid. They show up there on their own dime. They take care of their own expenses. It's truly a volunteer effort. People from every division all over the country have served on the Olympic patrols. If you ask any ski patroller what the best patrol that they know of, they'll always say their own. It's not a boast, but it's truly their belief that their patrol is the best. Once you join a patrol, you are really bonded to that unit.
We were paid in smiles among one another and just the knowledge that we'd done it and having gone through something that was really tough together. A buddy feeling that you never lose.
The key thing, and I think one of the things that I learned through watching my parents, is the camaraderie. Many, many lifelong friendships are made through the ski patrol, and it truly is an extended family.
Time has passed, and a lot of these great men who established such a tradition and put their efforts in there, both their lives on the line and their time on the line, have passed away. But the tradition is there, established by these great men.
But it's important to carry on what DOLE started and to make sure that we protect it so that the next generation of patrollers have the same opportunity to serve in an organization that is such a quality organization. If you can imagine going to a job where everybody's there because they want to be there, and the amazing things you could do with a work team like that, that's the National Ski Patrol.
Vermont PBS, partnering with local filmmakers to bring you stories made here. For more, visit vermontpbs.org.